In the demon realm, a cataclysmic battle had just ended. Amid the ruins, one survivor sighed in relief. In the battlefield, a voice called out, asking if his parents were still alive. He vowed never to die before them. They were the great sage and the battle master, the two strongest people in the world. Though exhausted, they smiled, admitting this had been a formidable opponent after such a long time. Suddenly, a blinding light appeared. A strange voice spoke, confirming that the two of them had won. Both were pushed back by an invisible force. The voice continued, explaining that if they hadn't acted, the human world might have been destroyed. A goddess appeared, bowing in gratitude that they had saved the world from the demon god Beelzebub. The goddess offered to reward the two heroes, but they replied indifferently, saying they only wished to fight strong opponents. They insisted they cared nothing for fame or fortune and were simply lovers of battle. If granted a wish, they'd probably only ask for more powerful enemies. But the goddess saw through their regret. Neither had children or disciples to pass on the martial arts they had perfected. Both sheepishly admitted that no one could endure their hellish training. So the goddess decided to grant a special service. For tonight only, she would restore their youth and remove the reason they couldn't have children. The two heroes froze. The goddess, however, was thrilled by the idea. She cheerfully encouraged them, telling the two to do their best tonight. The faces of the legendary heroes flushed with embarrassment. And so, 30 years later, many things had happened. The scene shifts to a cozy wooden house. Before long, they were blessed with a son named Yuan. 5 years later, the father, the great sage, was loudly urging his son on. 5-year-old Yuan answered his father and began gathering energy with both hands. A giant magic circle appeared beneath his feet. Yuan easily performed the twin mind technique, a complex skill. The father watched from afar, unsurprised. The boy unleashed his final move. A surge of immense magic force shot straight forward. A thunderous explosion rang out, the ground violently trembling. The smoke cleared to reveal a vast, deep crater. Yet instead of praise, the father only sighed. He muttered, unable to believe his son hadn't destroyed the terrain within 0.02 seconds. He told Yuan that any 5-year-old could destroy the terrain. Hearing this, Yuan bowed his head in apology, blaming himself for lacking talent. Seeing his son upset, the great sage patted the boy's head and reassured him. He explained that the average age to use the twin mind technique is 7, so Yuan was by no means useless. The encouragement made Yuan cheerful again. He smiled and told his son that with diligent practice, one day he could become like ordinary people. In the bedroom, after Yuan had fallen asleep, the mother turned to ask her husband about their son's magic. The father looked at their child fondly, thinking the boy possessed astonishing talent. He realized Yuan could already use ancient magics and in a few years might redraw the map of the world. The mother was equally proud, recounting that she had trained Yuan the day before. Little Yuan faced a giant, roaring bear, but the boy was unafraid. Yuan threw a light punch, sending a multi-ton boulder flying into the sky. The mother standing beside him praised him, explaining it was the Aiki technique. The rock fell back down, creating a small tremor. The bear was defeated, sinking deep into the rock face. But instead of praise, Yuan was scolded by his mother for only doing at 5 what 4-year-olds could already do. The boy could only mutter an apology. Next, the boy focused his energy in his hands and punched the mountain peak. A huge section of the mountain shattered. The mother watched from a distance, nodding in acknowledgement that her son was nearly perfecting the chakra release technique. Yuan eagerly recited the lesson, saying that channeling qi into the nerves and controlling the muscles would multiply his strength many times over. The mother added that mastering chakra release would improve reflexes and close-quarter speed. She told Yuan he had done very well, even though children usually reach this level at 6. Yuan cheered with joy at his mother's praise. The training ended, and the two returned home as night fell. Back in the bedroom, the mother whispered to her husband that at his current level, even the drunken adventurers at the guild would be no match for Yuan. She stated it confidently, while the father simply fell into quiet thought. They both knew their son possessed extraordinary talent, able to surpass both of them easily. But they also agreed they couldn't let Yuan grow arrogant, since braggarts quickly stop striving. They didn't want to see their son repeat that mistake. The mother wondered why they had waited until old age to have this child. They both watched their sleeping son and smiled, admitting that he was so adorable they couldn't help spoiling him. Time flew by. 11 years passed. A voice called out at the front door. A strange guest knocked. The door opened. It was a horned man named Wolf. He waved at Yuan. Yuan, now 16, cheerfully greeted him, Lord Wolf. Wolf was surprised to find Yuan home alone and asked where the battle master was. Hearing that title, Yuan flinched in alarm. Wolf suddenly recalled that Yuan's parents had told him to keep their true identities secret. He grew awkward, hurriedly changed the subject, and asked after Yuan's mother. Yuan innocently replied that his father had gone to hunt a large lizard, and his mother was out doing laundry because something got dirty. Wolf repeated Yuan's words, hunting lizards and doing laundry. His face began to change color. He suddenly remembered that dragons had been rampaging in the area recently, causing villagers to flee in terror. Wolf began to piece things together, lizard and something dirty. He started to sweat. Wolf suddenly remembered a squad of black knights that had once invaded from the demon realm. In the distance, a pitch-black, gloomy castle loomed, making his companions startle and become alert. Wolf began to sweat, his face draining of color, silently praying that it was only a coincidence. But then the door swung open. Two of his teammates rushed in, shouting the name of the boy they were searching for, Yuan. As expected, the father carried the carcass of a giant dragon, cheerfully boasting it was lizard meat. The mother, covered in blood, greeted Wolf as if nothing had happened. Yuan lit up with happiness at the prospect of eating his favorite dish. Wolf could only sigh, muttering, "Just as I thought." He turned to ask Yuan if he knew what kind of meat it was. Yuan innocently described it as a 20-meter-long beast that breathes fire, adding that he often hunted it. Wolf couldn't believe his ears. He whispered to the father, astonished that a 16-year-old could hunt such a creature alone. The father only laughed and confirmed it. Wolf stood frozen in shock, while Yuan looked bewildered at the commotion. The mother suddenly spoke up and asked Wolf to assess Yuan's training, saying they felt they had been too lenient with their son. They said they were a bit worried about Yuan's current abilities and wanted to know what outsiders would think. Yuan's parents pleaded, even calling him the Wolf Demon King. With no choice left, Wolf reluctantly agreed. Yuan innocently asked if Wolf's family name was Demon King, then happily accepted the offer of Lord Wolf Demon King. The three of them went to a nearby lake. Wolf stood there, utterly confused, not knowing where to begin. While he was still pondering what to check, Yuan began casting a spell. The boy raised his hand toward the lake, and a giant magic circle appeared. A massive explosion occurred, sending the lake's water flying into the sky. Wolf could only close his eyes and endure it, while Yuan's parents stood behind him, their faces filled with worry. When everything settled, the entire lake had evaporated. The mother called out for Yuan. An angry white-bearded old man, Pa, berated a horned man named Wolf, demanding to know why he hadn't dried up the whole lake. Wolf trembled and bowed, apologizing to his father. Pa continued to scold that the job was sloppy, leaving puddles everywhere. He argued that a child of this age should easily erase an entire lake without leaving a trace. The scene shifted to another training session. A long-haired woman, Ma, called for her son Yuan. The boy stood amid parched, cracked earth after an explosion. Immediately, a giant boulder was hurled straight at Yuan. From afar, Ma shouted, reminding him never to take his eyes off the target. Yuan instantly took an attacking stance, ready to face the rock. Watching the scene, Wolf gaped in amazement. Without hesitation, the boy threw a punch straight at the incoming boulder. The rock shattered into 100 pieces from a single blow. The punch's tremendous force made the ground tremble. Ma shouted Yuan's name loudly, her voice full of disappointment. But instead of praise, Ma scolded Yuan for not pulverizing the rock into dust. Yuan could only mumble an apology to his mother. Wolf, who was watching, went pale. He couldn't believe his ears when Ma said a 12-year-old could do that. Later, inside the house, Ma sat down to speak with Pa. She asked his opinion about Yuan's abilities, wondering what the boy truly was. Wolf, now seated at the table, trembled. He muttered that Yuan was a genuine monster, and even using his full power he would struggle to fight him. Hearing Wolf, Ma and Pa only fell silent and exchanged thoughtful looks. Pa spoke up, saying they should perhaps consider Wolf's opinion, since he was a devil lord. But he added that Yuan was only a monster compared to ordinary people. Wolf recalled to himself that 40 years ago he had been completely defeated by this very couple. Meanwhile, Ma and Pa continued to worry about Yuan. A strange man asked what they were worried about. Wolf asserted that Yuan's power was unmatched in this world. Meanwhile, Yuan innocently did the household chores. Pa's voice explained that Yuan had lived here all his life and never interacted with the outside world. But the boy had a dream. Wolf curiously asked about that dream. Pa explained that since childhood, Yuan had admired the image of knights from storybooks. And that was why, recently, Yuan confessed he wanted to take the knight selection exam. Hearing this, Wolf thought the issue wasn't becoming a knight. With that power, Yuan could single-handedly wipe out all of humanity's cavalry. He asked in confusion, so what exactly were the two of them worried about? Pa explained solemnly that they feared letting Yuan go to town because the boy still lacked combat discipline. The answer was so absurd that Wolf couldn't help crushing the cup in his hand. He shouted, "What?" Wolf couldn't understand what they were saying. Ma and Pa slammed the table and began to panic list the dangers in town, such as, Pa worried aloud, what if Yuan encounters Lucifer in town? Then he reassured himself that Lucifer wouldn't show up there. Ma fretted in turn. What if Yuan runs into Pazuzu? But she dismissed it too, since even in the demon realm, they rarely make public appearances. Both of them trembled under the blanket. Pa concluded that with an inexperienced Yuan, facing those kinds of beings would force the boy to use all his strength just to flee. Ma said they had raised their son with care. Pa added that as parents they had a duty not to push a naive child into a dangerous world. They didn't want their child to face any risks. Hearing this, Wolf was left speechless. He sat there, staring at the puddle from the broken cup, unsure what else to say. Wolf thought to himself that he'd given the most honest opinion he could, but it seemed to have no effect. 1 week later, after witnessing the elderly couple's overprotectiveness, Wolf was on his way home when suddenly a piercing scream rang out from behind. He spun around in panic. Someone reported that Yuan had run away from home. Wolf shouted in disbelief, "Yuan!" Wolf muttered that this was not what he'd expected when called back. He asked why Yuan had run off. Pa handed him a letter. Yuan had left it behind. The letter began with an apology addressed to his parents. In the letter, Yuan wrote that something had been circling in his mind for some time, and he had decided to leave home. He recounted his failures, only being able to break a giant boulder into pebbles and leaving a few puddles when trying to drain the lake. Wolf broke into a sweat reading this. He turned to ask Ma whether these were things a normal 16-year-old could do. The letter continued. Yuan wrote that he had fully realized how weak he was. His dream was to become a knight, and to do that he needed power. He thought that if he couldn't do what an ordinary person could, he wasn't fit to be a knight. So he had given a lot of thought to what he should do. Then, with a determined expression, he reached a conclusion. He believed that because his parents had raised him with love, a spoiled nature had taken root in him. Therefore, he would reassess himself and train on his own. Reading this, Wolf leapt to his feet. He couldn't grasp the meaning of those words. In the letter, Yuan declared he would head into town. Wolf stammered that the so-called normal Yuan always referred to was completely skewed compared to most people's understanding. Ma suddenly admitted, "Yes, it's because we raised him that way." Wolf was stunned into silence. Pa explained that Yuan could always do whatever they taught in an instant. And that was why, so he wouldn't become arrogant, they told Yuan that whatever he did, ordinary people could do far better. Wolf finally understood. Now Wolf understood. Yuan's unbelievable innocence and lack of common knowledge were all caused by these two. At the same time, far away, Yuan sneezed while on his way. Pa and Ma finally revealed the real reason. They explained to Wolf that they didn't want Yuan to become arrogant, no matter how talented he was. Memories of talented people who fell because of pride still haunted them. Pa said they were too tired of witnessing that tragedy repeat. Ma insisted that they had decided not to let Yuan suffer the same fate. Wolf was left speechless. Ma revealed further that they also had a reason to hide their true identities from Yuan. To him, they were just an old couple who knew a little magic and martial arts. Wolf spat out his drink, shouting that they were not ordinary at all. Ma recalled that they had always taught Yuan they were just ordinary elderly people and couldn't let him know the truth. Wolf screamed inside his head. One could alter the terrain with a single punch, the other could fire nuclear-level magic. Together, they had defeated the demon god Beelzebub 16 years ago. He affirmed they were the strongest people in the world. Immediately after, Pa and Ma asked Wolf, as a devil lord, to use all his connections to find Yuan. Wolf glanced at them and asked what they meant. Wolf lost his patience and slammed the table, shouting. He had tried to tell these fools that the encounters they feared, like Yuan suddenly meeting Satan, would never happen. Wolf realized the situation was awful. If Yuan were left alone, that innocent boy could easily get lost in this dense forest. Worse, if lost, Yuan might decide to use magic to clear the trees. Wolf shivered at the thought. Terrible. The world would end. He slammed the table again. All right, I get it. I'll go find Yuan. He couldn't let things stay like this. Wolf rushed off. He was determined to find Yuan, tell the boy the truth, and give him a proper education. He shouted into the air, "Wait for me, Yuan." At the same time, Yuan was walking alone, seemingly hearing something and turning his head. He thought he had just heard someone's voice, but then dismissed it as imagination and kept walking. He stopped and looked back at the mountain he'd just ascended. He guessed his parents were probably reading his letter by now. He knew they'd surely be worried, but he looked back toward the house and promised that once he became stronger, he would definitely return. Regaining his resolve, Yuan told himself to find the town now. He saw a meadow ahead and cheered. Once he crossed that border, he'd be in new territory. With a radiant smile, he ran on. He would do his best to become a knight like the ones he admired. In the previous chapter, overprotected by his parents, Yuan ran away, believing he was weak. He set out to train himself, clutching a crumpled map. To achieve that goal, Yuan went alone to the city of Amstel, crossing the vast Yumaroth plains. Looking at the map, he estimated the distance at about 200 kilometers and confidently thought he could trot there in 30 minutes. But then, he suddenly froze. Yuan looked up, surprised by a flock of giant birds in the sky. Hidden within the flock was a winged humanoid. He squinted. A familiar feeling stirred when he saw that winged creature. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the plains, a voice rang out, assembling the soldiers. A large army was gathering. The commander on horseback thanked the volunteers for serving their country. The commander, Captain Eddie Mauvet, announced that the Gillies Empire had used a large-scale summoning spell to invade their land. What they had summoned were the creatures the soldiers saw in the sky, 8th-tier angels. The battle was about to begin, but the situation was dire. Their force numbered only 200, while the enemy had 1,000 angels. Yet one soldier shouted that they were brave warriors and 1,000 angels were nothing. Captain Eddie continued to rally the troops, declaring that if each man took down 5 enemies they'd win, and that honor mattered more than life. In response to the call, the entire army shouted in unison, raised their weapons, and vowed to bring glory to their homeland. Captain Eddie ordered the archers into position, ready to shoot down enemies as they approached. But a subordinate officer noticed his pensive expression and asked if something was wrong. Eddie admitted that although their troops were well-trained, things would be different if the opponent were human. He recalled a horrifying memory. In the past, they had lost dozens of soldiers just to take down a single angel. But this time, the number of enemies they faced was far greater. He was certain of one thing. Even if they managed to cut the enemy numbers in half, Their own army would be completely destroyed in the process. Burdened by the weight of it, Eddie tormented himself for being the one to lead them to death. The deputy commander, standing nearby, suddenly chuckled. Eddie was surprised and confused. The deputy, still smiling, explained that everyone here already knew that. He went on to say that everyone had prepared themselves to die to protect what they held dear. The shrill cries of the angel flock drew nearer. Yet the army held firm, ranks steady, ready to meet them. Seeing the soldiers' resolute will, Eddie admitted the deputy was right. Everyone was ready. Eddie realized he was the one lacking resolve. The faces of the soldiers showed they were warriors who accepted death. He apologized to them, feeling his words might have been an insult. But the deputy only smiled and replied that their lives were in the captain's hands. Strengthened, Eddie shouted that his mission was to bring back as many people safely as possible, then rallied everyone to charge. But at that moment, a voice cut through. Yuan had somehow appeared right behind him. The innocent boy asked what rank those angels were. Eddie, though taken aback, answered that they were tier 8. Hearing this, Yuan joyfully exclaimed there was nothing to worry about, leaving Eddie and the deputy dumbfounded. With that, Yuan flew straight into the sky, leaving the two veteran soldiers utterly astonished. Could the boy really fly? Flying toward the angels, Yuan suddenly remembered a childhood memory. He recalled seeing a similar creature with his mother. At that time, his mother had pointed at the winged creature and said, "That's called an angel." Yuan looked at his mother with curiosity. Then his mother, a martial arts master, simply picked up a pebble, and threw it. The angel exploded instantly. She casually explained that it was just a bird. Yuan naively asked again because it looked human, but his mother insisted it was a bird. She explained that they were merely machines obeying their lord, with no mercy. She concluded that it was too complicated for a child, and all Yuan needed to know was, angels are bad birds that attack human villages. He still wondered why they were bad. His mother calmly explained that angels were actually very fragile. They were so weak that if ordinary people like them released fighting energy to prepare for battle, the angels would die from the shockwave. Little Yuan believed this without question. Back in the present, while the soldiers below panicked at the sight of another monster, Yuan sighed with relief that he had only encountered angels. He murmured that as a child he hadn't understood why they were bad, but now he knew. Angels were bad birds that attacked human villages. That meant Yuan lunged straight at them. They were pests destroying the crops. Yuan clenched his fists, determined to protect the farmers' harvest. With this number attacking the fields, the farmers would be in serious trouble. He had to act. Yuan's gaze turned icy. The angels seemed to sense the danger. Their expressions changed. Then a blinding light erupted from his position, enveloping the entire angelic host. He was preparing to use the ultimate forbidden art. Yuan unleashed the move Eternal Blade. A gigantic magical vortex formed, devouring and tearing apart everything within its reach. In an instant, the sky cleared. Below, the soldiers stood stunned at the unbelievable sight. The entire angel army had vanished without a trace. Yuan gently landed amid the astonishment of Captain Eddie and all the troops. What had just happened? The soldiers could only stand silent, staring at the battlefield strewn with angel corpses, unable to believe their eyes. Yuan wondered if he had wiped them all out. Suddenly, a pure white feather drifted down. A voice sounded from the sky, praising Yuan. A higher-ranked angel, a third-tier thrones, appeared. He acknowledged Yuan was quite strong for a human. Eddie panicked as he realized a new foe. The throne smugly declared that now he was here, Yuan would not return alive. The thrones explained the angels' hierarchy, emphasizing that those Yuan had defeated were only the lowest rank. Eddie was horrified to learn the opponent was tier 3, while Yuan was simply confused. The throne's power was equivalent to 2,000 low-ranking angels. The news stunned Yuan, but then he smiled, suddenly remembering his mother had once mentioned this. The scene shifted to a memory. His mother had warned that although angels might be physically weak, their top commanders, the Seraphim, were far too difficult for him to handle alone. If he encountered one, he had to call her or his father. However, she had added that Yuan would have no trouble with angels of Tier 2 or below. This led Yuan to believe that even an ordinary person could defeat a Tier 3 angel. Back in the present, Eddie shouted in alarm, warning Yuan that the enemy was a Tier 3 angel. But Yuan merely muttered that it looked impressive, but wasn't the alpha bird. Yuan turned to face the thrones and calmly asked if he was just a big bird. Yuan's attitude left the thrones momentarily speechless. He noticed something odd. He felt no fear from the boy. Shaking off his confusion, the thrones cleared his throat and declared he would show Yuan his true power. He summoned a contingent of subordinates, 6-tier angels. Eddie was once again horrified at the arrival of a new enemy, this time Tier 6. The thrones boasted that each of his underlings had the strength of 1,000 low-ranking angels. But Yuan gave them no chance. He charged in and tore them apart one by one. His punches and kicks easily felled the 6-tier angels. They could only scream in agony before dissipating. In the blink of an eye, all the throne's subordinates were annihilated. He stood frozen, speechless. Yuan turned back, looked at the soldiers, and asked if they were familiar with the term bird disaster. He pointed at the thrones, his voice serious, declaring that all the farmers were worried about their birds. Yuan's impassioned declaration brought an odd silence over the battlefield. His words left the soldiers bewildered. Farmers? What was this boy talking about? Yuan turned to them and declared passionately that if these birds attacked the villages, everyone would band together to exterminate them. Right? His plea was met only with confused silence. He shouted at the thrones, ordering him to return to his place of origin and not trouble the villages. The thrones stood dumbstruck. As Yuan continued shouting, the thrones realized in horror that even he couldn't see the boy's attack. This couldn't be happening. Feeling ignored, Yuan stomped his foot. The ground trembled violently as a terrifying force radiated out, forcing the thrones to step back. He shouted, "Please listen to me." Yuan kept pleading for him to leave. The power from his stomp caused a massive explosion, blowing away a large swath of earth and making the thrones vanish. 200 soldiers witnessed the entire event. This miracle would later be recorded in the history books as the first appearance of a mysterious, transcendent being. And because the event occurred on the Yumaroth plain, future historians called that creature the Nightmare of Yumaroth. Meanwhile, Yuan casually checked his map, sighed, and continued running. To this day, no one truly knows what it was. Yuan just thought you could encounter all sorts of birds on the road to town. Then he pulled himself together and resolved to run straight to the town. The story opens with Yuan panting, composing a letter to his parents in his head. He wrote that it had been a week since he left home, and during that time he had faced countless battles. Having overcome them all, he had finally arrived where he needed to be. Stepping into the city of Amstel for the first time, Yuan was overwhelmed by its grandeur. For a country boy, the bustling crowds and 3-story buildings were nothing short of miraculous. Yuan strolled down the street, constantly marveling at how wonderful the place was. After taking in the sights with curious eyes, Yuan decided to gather information first. His gaze was quickly drawn to posters plastered on a nearby wall. Standing amid the crowd, he looked up with a slightly bewildered expression. What he was looking at was a recruitment notice for the Night Corps. The notice led Yuan to the Amstel Castle Guard Station, where many people had gathered. A female deputy captain stepped forward and began briefing all the applicants. She declared in a firm voice that the recruitment exam for the Night Corps had officially begun. Yuan stood in the crowd, his eyes shining with determination. The deputy explained that the exam would be divided into 2 parts, the first being a basic aptitude test. The second part would be a head-to-head elimination tournament. Yuan recalled why he registered. The exam content, from the 100-meter dash to elimination matches, matched the story of the great knight he admired. So he signed up without hesitation to test himself. He found it amazing. The inspiring tale that motivated him had started exactly the same way, with the protagonist entering a recruitment exam. Now Yuan stood right where he had longed to be, ready to begin his own journey. The feeling of a dream come true made him shiver with joy. But at that moment, other candidates began whispering and mocking his rustic appearance. Ignoring their words, Yuan reminded himself he had come a long way and couldn't miss this chance. He admitted he might not be skilled enough to pass, but this would be valuable experience for next time. The deputy announced the first test would be a 100-meter sprint. A flame of determination ignited within Yuan. He was eager to take on the challenge. Looking at the track, Yuan seemed unconcerned. He suddenly recalled his mother's light daily training, running 1,000 laps carrying a 40-ton weight. Yuan took his starting position. Behind him, the other contestants looked at him with contempt, unaware of what they were about to face. The female deputy captain shouted the command, "Begin!" The competition officially started. The moment Yuan lifted his foot, a horrific explosion rang out. He shot forward like an arrow, creating a shockwave that sent all the other competitors flying into the air. He looked back, bewildered, not understanding what had just happened. The result of his start was a gigantic hole at the starting line, terrifying everyone. Meanwhile, at the finish line, Yuan innocently explained to a stunned judge that this always happened whenever he ran on soft ground. The area was chaotic in a cloud of dust. People panicked, not knowing what had occurred. Some thought they were under attack. Only Yuan stood there, puzzled why everyone was reacting that way. He politely informed the judge that he'd finished, causing the flustered man to snap sharply before quickly restraining himself. The deputy captain, her face tense, checked her stopwatch and announced Yuan's time as 15 seconds. Her expression showed utter disbelief. To reassure everyone, she hurriedly explained that it was probably just a meteorite and the contest would resume after the area was cleared. Yuan panicked at that. After the meteorite incident, the deputy captain announced the next event would be the shot put. She outlined the rules. Each person had only one throw. Yuan breathed a sigh of relief, grateful his earlier result wouldn't be changed. The first name called was Richard. Hearing that name startled Yuan. The reason was that Richard had a bulging, muscular physique, unlike a normal person's. Yuan broke out in a cold sweat just looking at him. The deputy captain announced that Yuan's turn would be right after Richard, and he cheered him on. Meanwhile, Richard took his position, ready to throw. Richard strained with all his might and launched a powerful throw. The shot flew far and landed with a heavy thud. The deputy captain prepared to announce the result. Another judge confirmed the distance, 120 meters. It was the longest throw in the competition so far. Those around murmured in admiration, calling him Amstel's top martial artist. At that moment, Yuan wandered forward, bewildered, asking if it was his turn. But instead of competing, Yuan ran up to Richard and asked the secret to his incredible muscles. Richard proudly said it was thanks to training. Feeling sidelined, Yuan whimpered and begged everyone not to ignore his event any longer, declaring he was about to throw. He swung his arm very casually, even uttering an oops, as if he'd mishandled it. Yet the shot rocketed away like a bullet, heading straight toward a distant mountain range, leaving a judge staring in incomprehension. Then a cataclysmic explosion occurred, blowing off the top of the mountain. The deputy captain was frozen, horrified as she watched the mountain collapse before her eyes. Panic swept through the crowd again. Trying to stay calm, the deputy muttered that it must be another meteorite. She turned to ask Yuan when he intended to throw. Yuan blankly replied that he had already thrown. She snapped, saying she hadn't seen any shot on the field. Yuan innocently pointed toward the destroyed mountain and said, "There." Exhausted and frightened, the deputy concluded he had merely been lucky and called the next contestant, leaving Yuan aside. He was left amid the crowd's chatter. They speculated Yuan was the type to get lucky and had used the chaos to steal the competition's shot and take it home. They even swapped a legend that if you took a shot from the contest home, you'd be sure to pass next time. Hearing that, poor Yuan immediately believed it and collapsed to the ground in despair, blaming himself for not having done that. The deputy captain irritably brushed it off. She declared that because no shot could be found as evidence, Yuan's result would be disqualified. She then moved on to the final qualifying test, using a crystal orb. She explained that the orb contained a flame that reacted to magic. Whoever made that flame glow would be granted automatic passage through the qualifiers, regardless of prior physical test results. People were puzzled, not understanding why such a test existed, and began murmuring about magic knights, special knights who could wield both swordsmanship and magic. The deputy captain said the test was created to find talents suited for that role. However, she also warned that the test was extremely difficult, as it would determine the entire outcome of the preliminaries. The other candidates began whispering anxiously, saying that even a graduate of an average magic academy would struggle to make the orb glow. Hearing that, Yuan grew even more self-conscious, thinking someone ordinary like him had no chance. Just then, the deputy called Yuan's name. He walked forward sadly, believing this would be his end in the exam. But the moment Yuan touched it, the crystal orb exploded to pieces. Yuan stood there bewildered, while the deputy captain behind him screamed in panic. The crowd erupted again. A series of explosions in one day made them start to suspect these were no coincidences. At this point, the judges began linking the events together. On reflection, all the terrifying explosions that day had been connected to this boy. The deputy captain broke out in a cold sweat. Suddenly, another judge grabbed Yuan's hand. He shouted, praising Yuan as an extraordinary recruit and urged that he be advanced to the finals to show the other contestants what he could do. Yuan remained clueless. Finals? He pointed at the pile of shards on the table and asked about the crystal orb test. The deputy captain, in her panic, cleverly invented a more than plausible explanation. She said the test required making the orb shine, and explode is also a form of shining, isn't it? She added that perhaps the orb was defective, which caused it to explode. Yuan was still in shock. And so, she solemnly announced, contestant Yuan had passed the preliminaries. Upon hearing this, Yuan burst into joy, shouting, I did it! Though he didn't fully understand, Yuan gladly accepted the result, telling himself that luck was also part of strength. He promised to do his best in round 2. From afar, a man with a scar across his eye smiled and noted that 16 people had advanced this year. That man was the captain of the Knight Corps. He appeared very eager to see the talent of this year's recruits. His subordinate reported that Richard was the most promising contestant. The captain laughed heartily, joking he'd put Richard through hellish training if he joined the Corps. While the candidates drew lots for round 2, the captain suddenly declared he would personally spar with the champion. The deputy sighed, muttering that whenever the captain was in the mood, he only thought of tormenting rookies with hellish drills. The captain, meanwhile, was excited to show the new recruits the power of the nation's strongest knight. Convinced he would face Richard, he turned to ask who Richard's opponent in the first match would be. A knight announced the draw results. The first match would be Richard versus Yuan. Yuan was taken aback. The captain grew angry, complaining that letting Richard fight a child wouldn't allow him to properly assess Richard's ability. The deputy calmly replied, wait and you'll see. Finally, the second round began in a large arena. Yuan stood in the arena, his face a mix of tension and determination. He calculated he needed to win 3 matches to reach the finals. Just then, Richard approached and confirmed that Yuan was his first opponent. Richard looked at Yuan condescendingly, praising him for getting through the qualifiers for a child. Yuan grew more anxious, sensing his opponent's power. Richard continued, saying he didn't like bullying those weaker than himself. Yuan clenched his fists and yelled that he truly wanted to become a knight. Yuan didn't understand. Richard explained that such behavior went against the essence of a knight. At the words essence, Yuan's eyes lit up. This was the quality he had always admired in knights. Yuan trembled with emotion, believing that someone strong and honorable like Richard truly deserved to be a knight. He realized this was the chivalric spirit he longed for, helping the weak and defeating the strong. Seeing him shake, Richard anxiously checked on him. In response to Richard's noble spirit, Yuan decided to take this chance to learn, to let Richard show him the difference in strength, and then accept defeat bravely. Yuan gritted his teeth bitterly, vowing this would be his one and only loss. He swore to train like mad, so that next time things would be different. Behind him, Richard, having just beaten him, could only scream in horror when he saw Yuan's punishment. One-arm push-ups while carrying a 10,000-ton rock on his back. In the vast arena, the town's top fighter, Richard, acted magnanimous. He reassured his opponent that he would go easy. Richard explained that before the match began, he wanted to gauge Yuan's strength to avoid causing unnecessary injury. Yuan seemed surprised by the offer. Yuan was moved by Richard's concern, whom he considered a true knight. He swallowed, summoned his courage, and agreed. Yuan bowed and declared he would give his all so as not to disappoint Richard's expectations. Immediately, Yuan began moving at dizzying speed, creating illusions that caught Richard off guard. Richard froze. He recognized this as the illusion technique of Eastern shinobi, used to execute a surprise attack. He recalled that producing even a single illusion marked one as a skilled shinobi. Sweat poured from Richard's brow as he sensed something was wrong. But before him were not one or two. Richard was stunned to count 27 illusions of Yuan surrounding him. Amid the ring of illusions, Yuan roared, preparing to unleash his decisive strike. He launched his strongest attack. A horrifying explosion rang out. The arena's ground shattered into pieces, leaving all witnesses aghast. When the dust cleared, the entire arena lay completely destroyed. A massive trail of devastation stretched out, as if a meteor had just swept through. Yuan stood amid the rubble, confused as he looked around. The other contestants had been stunned and knocked out by the attack. Richard, badly wounded, trembled as he asked if that was the boy's full power, then asked his name. The boy simply answered, "I'm Yuan." Immediately, Richard placed a hand on Yuan's shoulder, his gaze solemn, and declared, "I entrust this country to you, Yuan." Then he burst into tears, shouting that Yuan was the number one, while Yuan still didn't understand what was happening. Richard cried out that he withdrew. He could not fight such a monster. Yuan was completely shocked by the reaction. From the stands, the knight captain and his subordinates watched it all. The captain looked annoyed, realizing the boy's power far exceeded his own. One knight worried about the captain's reputation, but he waved it off. Faced with such a monster, his title as the strongest knight would become a joke. He knew that sooner or later the newly formed Order of Magic Knights would usurp his title. Then an idea flashed through his mind. While Yuan was still bewildered and asking Richard, the knight captain suddenly intervened. He pointed at Yuan and announced he would recommend the boy to the Order of Magic Knights. His plan was to have Yuan work temporarily for the Magic Knights, but under the supervision of his own Knight Corps. He was certain that Yuan, eager to become a knight, would gladly accept. That way, his team would possess the country's strongest knight. With Yuan on the team, he would be captain of the strongest Knight Corps, and his position would no longer be threatened. His ambition went further. With Yuan's power, whom he compared to a demon, becoming captain of the strongest Knight Corps would be only the beginning. While the captain was lost in his scheme, down in the arena, Richard formally bowed and conceded defeat. Yuan stood motionless, speechless at Richard's surrender. The judge declared Yuan the winner by forfeit. But for Yuan, this was already the third time he'd won in this manner. He recalled that his opponent in the second round hadn't even shown up, and now Richard had also forfeited. He couldn't understand why everyone acted this way. Yuan tried to reason it out. He remembered Richard's words and saw other contestants whispering and avoiding him. He reached the wrong conclusion. They despised him, a weakling not even worth fighting. In despair, Yuan turned and pleaded with the others. He only wanted a fair match. The childhood dream of becoming a great knight surged up. He shouted, believing he was only good for petty tricks. He begged them, pleading only to take part in the trial properly. In response to his pleas, there was only a terrifying silence from the crowd. All the other contestants were horrified and vehemently refused. No one dared face him. They began screaming and fleeing. Someone shouted that fighting Yuan wasn't a contest, but suicide. The reaction left Yuan even more stunned. He collapsed, wondering if he was truly so weak that everyone hated him. At that moment, the knight captain's voice rang out. The captain stepped forward, smiled, and gently asked Yuan to stop bullying the other trainees. Yuan panicked and hurriedly explained he had no such intent, while the other contestants trembled at the sight of the captain. But the captain cut him off. He declared Yuan's trial over, saying he didn't need to see any more. Yuan desperately asked if he was being barred from competing further. The captain coldly confirmed it. However, he offered an alternative, to arrange a transfer spot for Yuan to a newly established knight unit. Yuan could only bow his head, believing himself too weak to continue the trial. He sank into thought, convinced he'd been eliminated. The captain tried to call to him, but Yuan only stared at the crack in the ground, the aftermath of the prior attack, and assumed that was the reason. Yuan misinterpreted again. He thought the kind captain had seen he lacked talent and was helping him out of pity. Meanwhile, the captain was pleased that Yuan had taken the bait. Then Yuan remembered one thing. He said the champion, even if by default, would spar with the captain. He requested a match. He couldn't accept winning the entire tournament by forfeit without proving himself. He wanted at least one chance to fight with everything he had. Hearing this, the captain panicked and hurriedly tried to dissuade him. But Yuan was too dejected. He shouted that if he couldn't be tested, he would give up and stop caring about the consequences. His words, "I don't care about the consequences," terrified everyone, even the captain. The captain, sweating profusely, tried to calm the situation. He asked again if Yuan truly wanted to be examined. Yuan firmly agreed, while the others backed away, trembling. Yuan explained he needed an unrestricted match, using both body and soul, to understand his true power. He felt he could never forgive himself if he continued as he was. He clenched his fist and shouted for an all-out match with the captain. At the words, "all out," the captain's face and the other knights turned pale with fear. The other contestants immediately found excuses. Some said they were unwell. Others insisted they had withdrawn and would not fight. A quick-thinking contestant shifted responsibility to the captain, praising him as the greatest knight. Hearing this, Yuan's eyes lit up. He became even more eager to fight such a great man. The crowd, including Yuan, began to cheer for the captain. Cornered by his own people, he could only roar in anger. In a panic, he called for the vice-captain, but she had vanished, leaving only a wish of good luck. Now he had to face Yuan alone. His whole life flashed before the captain's eyes. Without hesitation, Yuan lunged forward, his speed cracking the ground. He swung his fist, preparing to deliver a strike. The captain squeezed his eyes shut, accepting his fate. He thought, "This is the end." But Yuan's fist stopped mere centimeters from his face. Yuan wondered why the captain had his eyes clamped shut, sweat pouring off him as if he were bathing. He was disappointed and asked if the captain had no intention of seriously fighting him. Then he turned and walked away. Yuan concluded again that he was still too weak to deserve the captain's full effort. He resolved to train harder. He bowed his head in thanks to the captain for showing him the way, believing the trial had been worthwhile. He vowed to turn this pain into strength and set off to find the strongest man he knew, then ran off. The captain looked dazed. He was still shaken when Yuan suddenly departed. Once Yuan's figure disappeared, the captain breathed a sigh of relief. He had thought he was about to die. Then he wondered who the strongest man the boy had mentioned could be. The fear passed, and he felt an enormous weight lift. He still could not believe a boy like that existed. He pondered Yuan's extraordinary power. It could rival a nation's secret military force. He realized keeping this information hidden would be wasteful. He decided he would go to see His Majesty. But a strange voice suddenly sounded, ordering him not to tell anyone. The captain startled and angrily shouted, not understanding who dared give him orders. A man with long hair and a pair of horns appeared. It was Demon Lord Wolf. He sighed, saying he had just found Yuan and then lost him again. The captain was horrified. He recognized Demon Lord Wolf, who, according to rumors, no longer attacked humans and now acted as a diplomat. He could not believe that the boy was connected to the demon lord. Behind Wolf, another horned girl peered out and giggled. Wolf stepped closer and threatened the captain. He warned that if any rumor about Yuan leaked out, he would cleanse him. The girl accompanying Wolf also spoke, claiming she had become a lover of peace and would spare his life if he obeyed. The captain swallowed and understood this was no joke. Wolf growled again for an answer. The captain hurriedly agreed, assuring he would not utter a single word. Meanwhile, Wolf thought he could not let Yuan attract the world attention, as the boy was still too naive. Wolf asked where Yuan had gone. The captain recalled Yuan mentioning he was off to find the strongest man. Wolf seemed to understand. The scene cut to a wooden house in a remote area. A deep voice echoed, repeating the phrase, "the strongest man." The man, Pa, turned and bluntly asked Wolf why he had come. Ma was there as well. Wolf explained that when he thought of the strongest man, he couldn't help but think of them. But then he realized Yuan wasn't home, and Ma scolded him. Ma explained that to Yuan, they were just ordinary old folks who knew a bit of martial arts and magic. Pa added that they had to act that way, so Yuan wouldn't become arrogant. Hearing this, Wolf only sighed, thinking it was time they let Yuan have a little pride. Wolf grew serious. He revealed that on the way, Yuan had single-handedly defeated an entire army of angels. Their son had surpassed human limits, and rumors of a supreme being were beginning to spread. At the word angels, both parents panicked, worried for their son. Wolf had to shout for them to calm down and hear him out, but they remained incessantly anxious. Wolf looked at them and sighed in exasperation. So, if his parents aren't the people he's looking for, then who is the strongest man Yuan is talking about?